My name is Eleanor Hartwell. I'm 34 years old, and on the night my husband threw my entire life into garbage bags, he had absolutely no idea he had just handed a loaded weapon to the one woman in the country most qualified to destroy him completely. But I'm getting ahead of myself. If you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this has traveled. And please, stay with me until the end. Friday, December 13th, 2024. 6:47 p.m. Penthouse, 38th floor, the Meridian Tower, Chicago. The elevator doors slid open, and I stepped into the marble foyer of the building I had called home for 5 years. I was carrying a bottle of Bordeaux, a 2008 Chateau Pichon Baron that Garrett had mentioned no fewer than 4 times since September. I tracked it down through a specialty importer in Lincoln Park, paid 3 times what a bottle of wine had any right to cost, and wrapped it in craft paper like it was something precious. Because I thought it was. I thought we were. Our 5th wedding anniversary, December 13th. I remember thinking, as the elevator climbed toward the 38th floor, that maybe tonight we'd finally just breathe. Order Thai food, open the bottle, sit on the floor like we used to when we first moved in, and the furniture hadn't arrived yet. Back when Garrett Whitmore was just a guy who laughed too loud at his own jokes and stole all the blankets and thought I was the most interesting person he'd ever met. That woman in the elevator. The one gripping a bottle of wine and quietly hoping. She had no idea what was waiting behind that oak door. She was about to find out. The first thing I noticed wasn't the silence. It was the smell. Plastic. Industrial grade, chemical sharp plastic. The kind that comes from heavy-duty contractor bags. The kind people use when they're throwing away a lot of something. I stopped in the doorway. 7 massive black garbage bags were piled in the center of our living room, stacked directly on top of the antique Tabriz rug I'd spent 11 weeks sourcing from an estate auction in Evanston. The top of one bag had split open under its own weight, and spilling out from the tier were things I recognized. The cream cashmere sweater I'd bought myself after closing my biggest case 2 years ago. The leather-bound journal I kept on my nightstand. A pair of pumps, black, Italian, the ones I only wore when I testified in federal court. Garrett was sitting on the Italian leather sectional, long legs crossed at the ankle, a glass of Macallan 18 balanced on his knee, wearing his charcoal Brioni suit, the one he only pulled out when he was closing a deal he considered significant. His dark hair was combed back with the kind of precision that required effort, and his expression, when he looked up at me standing in the doorway with a wine bottle and rain-damp hair, was completely and utterly blank. Not guilty, not conflicted, not even uncomfortable, just waiting for a task to be completed. Garrett Whitmore was 37 years old, the founder and CEO of Whitmore Capital, a private equity firm with $2.4 billion in assets under management, offices in Chicago, New York, and London, and a reputation for turning struggling mid-market companies into profitable acquisitions. He was the kind of man who got profiled in Crane's Chicago business and thanked his relentless drive in every interview, the kind of man who genuinely believed that the ability to make money was a form of moral superiority. He looked at me the way he looked at a line item that wasn't pulling its weight. "You're home early," he said. Not "happy anniversary," not "we need to talk," just that. 4 words, delivered with the enthusiasm of a man reading a parking meter. I looked at the bags, then back at him. "Garrett, what is this?" He took a slow sip of his whiskey, set the glass down on the coffee table with a soft, deliberate click, and reached to his left. He picked up a thick stack of documents, bound in a dark blue clip, the kind of heavy stock paper that cost real money to print, and tossed it across the glass surface toward me. It landed hard, final. "Divorce papers," he said. "I've already signed my portion. I need yours tonight." I didn't move. "Tonight." Don't make this dramatic, Elle. There's never a good time for this kind of thing, and drawing it out doesn't help either of us. He leaned back, spreading his arms across the back of the sofa like he was settling in for a casual conversation. "I'm moving in a different direction. You don't fit that picture anymore. It's really that simple." That simple. 5 years. The apartment I helped pay for, though he didn't know that, not really, not the full picture. The mortgage I'd quietly subsidized through a discretionary trust he didn't know existed. The dinners I'd hosted for his investors, the weekends I'd rearranged my actual work schedule, the work that required federal security clearance, to attend charity galas and dresses he picked out because he thought my taste was too understated. "You're divorcing me on our anniversary," I said. My voice was steady. I was already somewhere else in my head, somewhere cold and precise and very, very quiet. Garrett almost smiled. "Like I said, there's no good day for bad news." He stood up, walked around the coffee table, and looked at me with the frank, appraising expression of a man evaluating a property that had failed to appreciate. "Look, I'll be straight with you because I think you deserve that much. I'm a managing director at one of the top performing private equity firms in the country. I sit on 3 nonprofit boards. I get invited to Davos. My world, my actual world, requires a certain kind of partner. Someone ambitious. Someone who gets it." He gestured at me, at my sensible coat, my practical flats, the rain frizz in my hair. "You work from home doing data entry for a company I've never heard of. You make, what, $42,000 a year? You wear the same 4 outfits on rotation. You have no professional network, no social presence, no—" "Garrett, I'm not trying to be cruel, Elle. I'm just telling you why this isn't working. You're comfortable being ordinary, and I can't afford ordinary anymore." There it was, ordinary. I thought about what I had done that morning before he woke up. I had reviewed the final 28 pages of a 340-page forensic audit I'd been building for 6 weeks, signed off on a referral to the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission involving $180 million in suspected securities fraud, and taken a call from a deputy director at the Department of Justice who addressed me as Director Hartwell and meant it. Then I'd come home and made coffee and asked Garrett if he wanted eggs. The life I had built, the real one, the one with security clearances and federal courtrooms and a team of 12 who called me director without a trace of irony, existed in a completely parallel universe from the one my husband inhabited. I had kept it that way on purpose, to protect the people connected to my cases from retaliation. To protect him, honestly, though that thought now felt like a joke without a punchline. "I need you out by midnight," Garrett added, checking his Patek Philippe like I was a late-running meeting he needed to wrap up. "Keys on the counter. I have an early call tomorrow." I was still holding the wine. I set it down on the entryway table. Didn't throw it, didn't slam it. Just set it down. And that was when I heard the footsteps on the spiral staircase. She came down slowly, one hand trailing the glass railing, wearing my ivory silk robe, the one I'd had made at a boutique in Milan on a data entry seminar trip that was actually 3 days of expert witness preparation for a federal racketeering trial. She was 29 years old, blonde, polished, the kind of expensive looking that requires significant maintenance. But it wasn't her appearance that registered first. It was the robe. It was the ease with which she wore it, the casual, total entitlement of someone who had already decided this place belonged to her. She crossed the living room and slid her arm through Garrett's with the practiced smoothness of a woman who had been doing exactly this in this apartment for longer than tonight. "This is Ashley Monroe," Garrett said. "She's a senior associate at Dalton and Crow. We've been seeing each other for about 8 months. Ashley looked at me, then at the garbage bags, then back at me with an expression of performative, patronizing sympathy that I recognized immediately. I seen it on opposing counsel who thought they had the upper hand. "I know this is a lot to process," she said, her voice smooth and carefully modulated, "but honestly, you should take the settlement and move on. I've seen women in your position try to fight back." A small smile. "It doesn't go well for them. My hourly rate at the firm is more than your monthly salary. You cannot afford to walk into the lobby of a decent law firm, let alone retain one." Then Garrett pulled out his phone, opened our joint banking app, and held the screen toward me. 0. "Transferred everything to a personal account this morning," he said pleasantly. "Also had you removed as an authorized user on the platinum cards, and the joint accounts are frozen. You emptied our accounts. I protected my assets." He said it the way you'd say, "I locked the front door." Completely reasonable, completely obvious. "You contributed an administrative salary that barely covered groceries. I'm not going to let a disgruntled soon-to-be ex drain capital I spent a decade building." I looked around the living room one last time, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the imported marble fireplace, the custom pendant lights I'd spent 3 Saturdays choosing. Then I walked to the pile of garbage bags, reached behind them, and pulled out the small black suitcase I kept packed for exactly this kind of emergency. The kind that had nothing to do with Garrett and everything to do with my actual life. Encrypted hard drives, secure ID tokens, federal clearance credentials. He thought it was full of winter coats. I didn't look back at them. I didn't say anything. I walked to the front door, pulled it shut behind me, and stood in the hallway while the latch clicked into place, sealing them inside their temporary, fragile illusion of victory. Friday, December 13th, 2024, 8:15 p.m. Parking structure, 200 West Monroe Street. The elevator down was 38 floors of silence. By the time the doors opened at the lobby level, the slumped shoulders were gone. The slightly unfocused eyes were gone. The woman who had stood in that living room looking like she might cry, she was gone too. I walked out of the Meridian Tower and into the freezing Chicago December, and I felt more awake than I had in months. I walked 2 blocks to the parking structure on Monroe, took the stairs to level 3, and found my car in the corner space furthest from the security cameras. I sat in the driver's seat in the dark, unzipped the inner lining of the black suitcase, and retrieved what I needed: a matte black, encrypted smartphone issued by the security division of Sterling Forensics Group, biometrically locked, completely off every grid Garrett knew existed. I pressed my thumb to the scanner, typed the 16-digit alphanumeric passcode. The screen lit up. I opened the secure channel and called Derek Lawton, my senior director of investigations, a former IRS criminal investigation special agent who had been with me since I founded Sterling 7 years ago. He picked up on the second ring. "Director, you secure?" "Completely," I said. "Derek, I need you to initiate a level 4 forensic sweep. Immediate. Target is Garrett Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Capital, Chicago." A beat of silence. Not surprise. Derek had worked with me long enough to know that when I called on the secure line at 8 o'clock on a Friday night, the situation was already past the point of casual. "Copy that? Scope?" "Full sweep. 5 years minimum. All domestic accounts, all corporate structures, all wire transfer activity. And Derek," I paused, watching rain slide down the windshield in long gray streaks. "Flag anything with international routing, particularly anything moving through the Caribbean." "You think he's got offshore exposure?" "I think a man who just emptied a joint account and froze his wife's credit cards on their anniversary didn't do it because he's emotionally impulsive," I said. "He did it because he's been planning this for a while, and people who plan that carefully usually have something much bigger they're trying to protect." More typing. Rapid, mechanical, focused. "We'll have preliminary mapping by 0600. Anything else?" I looked out at the rain-slicked street. A cab splashed through a puddle. Somewhere above me, on the 38th floor of a glass tower, a man who thought he had just outmaneuvered a data entry clerk was pouring himself another Macallan and celebrating. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Tell the team to clear their weekends." I ended the call and sat in the dark for another minute. Garrett Whitmore had spent 5 years married to the chief director of a federally appointed forensic accounting firm. He had eaten breakfast across from me. He had complained about his day to me. He had looked at me, and seen nothing but a woman who wasn't worth the trouble of being honest with. He was about to learn that the most dangerous thing you can do is mistake someone's silence for emptiness. I started the engine and pulled out of the structure, heading toward the River North loft. The one registered to a holding company, the one he'd never set foot in, the one that was actually mine. The game had just begun, and I was already 3 moves ahead. Sunday, December 15th, 2024, 6:30 p.m. The Whitmore Estate, Lake Forest, Illinois. There are 2 kinds of powerful people in this world. The first kind builds something real, something that requires actual skill, actual sacrifice, actual years of getting it wrong before you get it right. They tend to be quiet about it, not out of modesty necessarily, but because the work itself is loud enough. The second kind inherits a last name and a zip code and then spends the rest of their life making sure everyone in the room understands exactly how much that's worth. The Whitmore family was aggressively, exhaustingly the second kind. Garrett had kept one thing from me, not the penthouse. He could have that, not the joint accounts. I had resources he didn't know existed, not even the 5 years I'd quietly subsidized our lifestyle through a discretionary trust while he took full credit for the mortgage at dinner parties. What he'd kept was a silver bracelet. It had belonged to my mother. She'd worn it every single day of her life until the morning she didn't wake up when I was 9 years old. It was tarnished and thin and worth maybe $40 at a pawn shop, and it was the only physical object in the world that I genuinely could not replace. Garrett knew that. He'd always known that, which is exactly why he kept it. So, on Sunday evening, 2 days after he'd tossed my life into garbage bags and introduced me to the woman wearing my silk robe, I drove my 7-year-old Honda Accord through the iron gates of the Whitmore family estate in Lake Forest and parked at the very edge of the circular driveway as far from the fleet of luxury vehicles as possible. Not because I was embarrassed, because I was watching. The housekeeper let me in with her eyes already averted, the particular kind of avoidance that told me she knew exactly what kind of evening this was going to be. The entryway smelled like roasted lamb and Chanel No. 5, and the specific brand of forced elegance that requires a full household staff and zero self-awareness to maintain. I walked straight to the dining room. They were all there. Dorothy Whitmore, 63 years old, matriarch, the kind of woman who ran a family like a corporation and called it love. She sat at the head of the long mahogany table in a cashmere wrap and enough diamonds to fund a small infrastructure project, and she looked up at me with an expression that managed to be both bored and contemptuous simultaneously. Richard Whitmore, 40 years old, Garrett's older brother, currently on his third bourbon of the evening based on the color of his face and the aggressive looseness of his posture. His phone was face up on the table beside his plate, vibrating every few minutes with calls he was deliberately not answering. I filed that away. Beside Richard sat Serena Price, his wife, 36 years old, former VP of Human Resources at a mid-sized logistics firm before she married into this family and, from what I could observe, was slowly being suffocated by it. She wore an emerald green dress that was quietly, effortlessly elegant, the kind of choice that comes from actual taste rather than a personal stylist, and she was watching the room with the focused, measuring stillness of someone running calculations nobody else knew were happening. She was the only person at that table who hadn't looked at me with contempt when I walked in. She was also the only person at that table who hadn't touched her food. And at Dorothy's right hand, occupying the chair that had been mine for 5 consecutive years of Sunday dinners I had attended, with the patience of a hostage negotiator, sat Ashley Monroe, designer dress, perfectly blown out hair. The self-satisfied posture of a woman who believes she has already won something. Garrett leaned back in his chair when he saw me, draping one arm over the back of Ashley's seat with the casual ownership of a man claiming territory. "Didn't think you'd actually show," he said. "I'm here for the bracelet," I said. "Give it to me and I'll go." Dorothy set down her wine glass with the particular precision of a woman who has been waiting for her entrance cue. "I'm the one who asked Bradley to invite you, actually," she said, and it landed like a correction, like she was establishing the terms of an agreement I hadn't agreed to. "Sit down, Ellie." "I'm fine standing, Dorothy." Her nostrils flared slightly. She didn't like that. Dorothy Whitmore had not built a dynasty, if you could call a family of financially comfortable bullies a dynasty, by tolerating people who declined to sit when told. "I wanted you here tonight," she continued, her voice carrying the particular resonance of someone accustomed to speaking in rooms where everyone listened, "so that you could see, clearly and without any romantic illusion, what a real partner for my son looks like." She gestured toward Ashley with the pride of someone presenting an acquisition. "Vanessa, Ashley, is a rising star at one of the most prestigious litigation firms in the country. She comes from an exceptional background. She understands the demands of Garrett's world. She belongs in it." Dorothy's gaze returned to me, and the warmth, already minimal, evaporated entirely. "We spent 5 years trying to bring you up to that standard, Eleanor, and I say this without cruelty. You simply were not buildable material." Richard snorted into his bourbon glass. Garrett looked at the middle distance with the expression of a man trying not to smile. "You grew up bouncing between foster placements," Dorothy continued, her tone taking on the specific momentum of someone who has rehearsed this speech and intends to deliver every line. "You have no family name, no professional reputation of any consequence, and no meaningful social capital. You sat at a keyboard and entered numbers into spreadsheets for a company none of us have ever heard of. That's not a career, Eleanor. That's a placeholder." She leaned forward slightly, both palms flat on the table. "My son is about to step into a level of society that requires—" "Dorothy." I said it once, quietly, without heat. Something in my voice made her stop. Not because it was rude. It wasn't. Not because it was loud. It wasn't that either. It was the complete, total absence of any defensive energy. I wasn't reacting. I wasn't flinching. I was simply standing in her dining room, absorbing her best material with the professional patience of someone who had sat across from hostile witnesses in federal court and waited for them to run out of things to say. That kind of stillness unnerves people. It unnerved Dorothy, just for a second. Then she recovered. Sign the papers, Eleanor. Take the settlement and allow this family to move forward. I looked at her, then at Garrett, then, just briefly, just for a fraction of a second, at Serena. Serena's knuckles were white around the napkin in her lap. Her eyes, when they met mine, were blazing with something that had been burning for a long time and was finally looking for a window. You're absolutely right, Dorothy, I said calmly. This family is going to need a very good lawyer very soon. I looked at Garrett and held out my hand. The bracelet. Now. Something shifted in his face. A flicker of something that wasn't quite uncertainty, but was adjacent to it. He reached into his jacket pocket and dropped the bracelet onto the table from about 6 inches up, like he was tossing a coin. It slid to the edge. I picked it up. I turned and walked out. I was 3 steps from the entryway when a hand closed around my arm. Richard, on his feet, bourbon drunk and grinning, blocking the hallway with his bulk. Not so fast, sweetheart. He snatched the bracelet out of my hand and held it up above his head, swinging it with the meanness of a man who needs someone smaller to feel large. You really think you can just walk in here, take shots at our mother, and roll out like you own the place, in that car? He laughed, jerky and too loud. Garrett, tell her. Tell her what happens when a nobody decides to play hardball with people who are actually somebody. Garrett had stood up. He was holding a fresh pour of Pinot Noir. Deep crimson, 2019 vintage, a bottle from the case his mother had received as a gift from a senator. He walked toward me slowly. Then he tilted his wrist. The wine hit the front of my gray cardigan in a wave of cold burgundy, spreading across my chest and soaking through to my skin in seconds. The room erupted. Dorothy's theatrical gasp, Ashley's bright, brittle laugh, Richard's wet cackle. I stood completely still. I did not gasp, did not raise my hands, did not look down at the ruined fabric. I just stood there, letting the wine drip from the hem of my cardigan onto the hardwood floor, and I looked at Garrett Whitmore with an expression I reserved for one specific category of person, the kind who has just made a catastrophic and irreversible mistake while smiling about it. Ashley stepped forward, holding a document and a gold pen. This is a comprehensive asset waiver, she said, professional mask back in place. Sign it right now, and you get the bracelet back. Refuse, and Richard drops it down the garbage disposal tonight. I took the pen. I pressed the document against the console table and signed my name with a perfectly steady hand. A document signed under physical duress, explicit property threat, and hostile witnesses? Any competent judge would throw it out in under 60 seconds. It was legally worthless. It was theater. And they needed the theater because they needed to believe they had won something. I let them have it. Ashley snatched the document back with a triumphant little smile. Garrett dropped the bracelet on the floor, didn't hand it to me, dropped it, and turned back toward the table. Good girl. Now get out. I bent down, picked up the bracelet, and fastened it around my wrist. As I straightened, my eyes found Serena one last time. She gave me a single small nod, barely a movement at all. But I'd spent 15 years reading people in interrogation rooms and depositions and hostile boardrooms. That nod said, I'm ready. Tell me when. Sunday, December 15th, 2024, 9:52 p.m., Ellie's car, Lake Forest. I sat in my Honda in the dark outside the Whitmore estate for 4 minutes before I started the engine. Not because I was upset, because I was thinking. I called Derek on the secure line. He picked up immediately. How'd it go? Exactly as expected, I said. Derek, what do we have on Richard Whitmore, specifically his financial activity over the last 18 months? The sound of a keyboard. Then, significant. The guy's got a serious gambling problem. We're talking multiple underground establishments, not just the riverboats. He's been moving cash and irregular deposits anywhere from $8,000 to $40,000 at a time into an account that routes through 2 LLCs before it lands anywhere traceable. At first, we flagged it as standard compulsive gambler behavior. At first, I repeated. Right. But when we cross-referenced the deposit timing with wire transfers from Whitmore Capital client accounts, specifically 4 clients whose portfolios have shown anomalous offshore activity, the pattern gets a lot more interesting. A pause. Director, these aren't gambling deposits. These are layering transactions. Someone is using Richard's casino connections to clean physical cash before routing it offshore. The Lake Forest streetlights blurred through the rain on my windshield. Cayman Islands? The routing numbers point that way, yeah, but we keep hitting an encrypted firewall on the international end. We can see the money leaving the domestic system, but we can't confirm the destination accounts without a geographic anchor, something that ties Garrett's identity directly to the offshore structures. Digital alone won't be enough for an immediate federal warrant. I know where the anchor is, I said. Inside the house? Behind a bookshelf in Dorothy's home office. Biometric safe. Garrett installed it himself. I thought of Serena's nod, and I think I know how to get inside it. Derek was quiet for a moment. Director, if we find what I think we're going to find in there, this stops being a divorce asset case. I know. We're talking RICO exposure. Federal racketeering, 20 years minimum per defendant. I know, Derek. A long exhale on his end. Okay, what do you need from me? I watched the iron gates of the Whitmore estate in my rearview mirror, lit from below, ornate and ridiculous, the kind of gate that announces wealth in the specific way that only insecurity requires. Get the decryption team on standby and pull everything you can find on Ashley Monroe at Dalton and Crow, education, case history, client roster. I put the car in drive, particularly anything that overlaps with Garrett's client list. You think she's more than just the girlfriend. I think a senior associate at a white shoe litigation firm doesn't fall for a private equity CEO by accident, I said. And I think a woman smart enough to make senior associate at Dalton and Crow doesn't spend 8 months in a relationship without understanding exactly what she's standing next to. So she's the legal architecture. That's my working theory. If I'm right, she's been using attorney-client privilege as a firewall around every fraudulent contract in the system. I turned onto the highway heading south toward the city. Pull everything. I want it on my desk by Tuesday morning. Copy that. I drove back to Chicago with the bracelet warm on my wrist and my mind already 3 chapters ahead of where everyone else thought this story was going. Garrett Whitmore had spent the evening humiliating a woman he believed was powerless. He hadn't spent a single second wondering why that woman wasn't afraid. That was his first mistake. It wasn't going to be his last. Monday, December 16th, 2024. 10:20, Sterling Forensics Group, 41st floor, 155 North Wacker Drive, Chicago. There's a specific kind of cruelty that dresses itself up as practicality. It doesn't scream. It doesn't throw things. It sits across from you in a well-tailored suit and explains with the measured patience of someone who genuinely believes their own logic exactly why destroying you is the reasonable, necessary, almost generous thing to do. Garrett Whitmore had been fluent in that language for as long as I'd known him. Monday morning, he decided to use it one more time. My actual office was nothing like what he imagined. He pictured, I know he did, because he'd made enough comments over the years about my little remote setup. A spare bedroom somewhere, maybe a folding table, a laptop with too many browser tabs open, a woman in sweatpants entering invoice numbers into a spreadsheet for a company that didn't matter. What he would have found, had he ever been allowed past the biometric entry doors of the 41st floor of 155 North Wacker Drive, was something considerably different. Sterling Forensics Group occupied the entire floor, 11,400 square feet of forensic accounting infrastructure, secure server rooms, an evidence analysis lab, and a situation room with a digital display wall that I sometimes thought of as the most expensive thing I'd ever built, and the thing I was most proud of in equal measure. 12 full-time analysts, 4 attorneys on retainer, 2 former federal investigators who reported directly to Derek, and a case archive that currently held open investigations touching 4 U.S. states and 2 foreign jurisdictions. I was sitting at my desk reviewing the preliminary Whitmore capital sweep when Patricia Cole, my chief of staff, 39 years old, a former public defender who had pivoted to forensic legal work after a decade in Cook County courtrooms and never looked back, knocked twice on my office door and opened it. Director, incoming call on the Hartwell administrative line. She held up her tablet, one eyebrow slightly raised in the way that meant you're going to want to hear this. Caller ID confirms as Garrett Whitmore. He routed it through his corporate office to our main switchboard. I leaned back in my chair. Hartwell Administrative Solutions was the shell company I used as employment cover. A meticulously maintained fiction with a real website, a real switchboard, and a real HR department, staffed by people who understood exactly what they were there to do. To anyone who searched Garrett's wife's employer, it looked like a perfectly unremarkable mid-size administrative services firm. That was the entire point. Garrett had clearly done exactly that search sometime this morning. Put him on the secure speaker, I said. You take the call as HR. Let him talk. Patricia nodded, settled into the chair across from my desk, cleared her throat once, and transformed voice, posture, energy into the mildly harassed HR manager of a company that was absolutely not a federal forensic operation. Hartwell Administrative Solutions, Human Resources, this is Patricia speaking. How can I help you? The voice that came through the speaker was smooth, deliberate, and layered with the particular brand of manufactured gravity that Garrett deployed when he wanted to seem like he was doing someone a reluctant favor. Good morning, Patricia. My name is Garrett Whitmore. I am the CEO of Whitmore Capital here in Chicago. I'm calling regarding one of your remote employees, a woman named Eleanor Hartwell. She may also go by Eleanor Reed. Of course, Mr. Whitmore. Is there something we can help you with? I hope so. I want to preface this by saying I take absolutely no pleasure in making this call. A carefully weighted pause. I'm currently going through a divorce with Eleanor, and in the course of our separation proceedings, some deeply concerning information has come to light. Information I felt a moral obligation to share with her employer before it creates a serious liability situation for your firm. Patricia caught my eye across the desk. I kept my face neutral. What kind of information, Mr. Whitmore? Eleanor has a significant, undisclosed gambling problem. He said it with the gravity of a doctor delivering a diagnosis. She's been making irregular cash withdrawals for months. She drained our joint accounts before I could protect them. Given that she handles sensitive client data for your company, billing records, financial information, I felt you had a right to know before her legal situation deteriorates further. A woman in financial freefall is a data security risk. I've seen it before. I pressed the mute button on my microphone and looked at Patricia. Fire me, I said quietly. Give him everything he wants. Make him feel like a hero. Patricia unmuted, inhaled sharply, and became a woman in the early stages of a corporate crisis. Oh my goodness, Mr. Whitmore, this is extremely alarming. We have a zero-tolerance policy for exactly this kind of situation. Our clients trust us with sensitive financial information, and if there's any credibility to what you're describing, there is significant credibility, Garrett said, warming to his role. I wouldn't have made this call otherwise. I know how disruptive this must be. We'll need to act immediately. I'm going to have to escalate this to our Director of Operations and initiate a termination review. Her remote access will be suspended within the hour. Patricia's voice dropped to a confidential murmur. Thank you for bringing this to us, Mr. Whitmore. Truly, you may have just saved us from a very serious situation. Just doing the right thing, Garrett said, and the line clicked dead. The secure speaker beeped twice. Patricia looked at me with the expression of someone watching a man saw off the branch he's sitting on. He really just did that. He really just did, I confirmed. 17 minutes later, my secondary phone, the number Garrett knew, the one he thought was my only line to the outside world, buzzed with a text message. I didn't need to unlock the screen to read the notification banner. Just heard about the job. Rough break. Honestly, though, probably for the best. Sign the papers, Elle. You've got nothing left to fight with. Take the $15,000 and start over. I picked up the phone, read it twice, set it back down, didn't reply. Silence is uniquely unbearable for a certain type of person, the kind who needs a reaction to confirm their own power. I had nothing to give him, and that nothing was going to eat at him in ways he wouldn't fully understand until it was much too late. I turned back to my screens. Derek had flagged something new in the Whitmore Capital sweep overnight, a cluster of client accounts showing wire transfer patterns that aligned with known offshore layering techniques. The Cayman firewall was still holding, but it was thinner than it had been 48 hours ago. We were close. I just needed one more thing. I needed to get inside that safe. Wednesday, December 18th, 2024, 2 p.m., Briar and Bloom Coffee, Lincoln Square, Chicago. I arrived 20 minutes early. Not the gray cardigan, not the sensible flats. I wore a camel wool coat over dark trousers, hair pulled back clean, the posture I used in federal buildings, the one that said, I belong at this table without requiring a single word to establish it. I ordered a black espresso and sat in the corner booth furthest from the windows, screened from the rest of the room by a tall partition of tropical plants that the owners had clearly chosen for atmosphere, and I was choosing for operational privacy. Briar and Bloom was a deliberate selection, far enough from the Gold Coast that no one in the Whitmore social orbit would casually walk in, quiet enough on Wednesday afternoons that a conversation could stay private, the kind of neighborhood place where nobody looked twice at two women having coffee. Serena Price walked in at exactly 2 p.m. She wore a camel-colored wrap coat over dark slacks. Not coordinated with mine, just the instinct of two women with actual taste making similar choices. And she moved through the coffee shop with the contained, deliberate energy of someone who had been very careful for a very long time and was making a conscious decision to stop. She saw me immediately. Didn't hesitate. Slid into the booth across from me, set her bag on the bench beside her, and looked at me the way a person looks at someone when they're done pretending they don't know what's going on. "You clean up," she said. "So do you," I replied. A beat. Then she said, "Who are you, actually?" It was the right question, asked by someone who had clearly been sitting with it for longer than the last 4 days. "I run a forensic accounting firm," I said. "We're appointed by federal courts to investigate financial fraud. I've been maintaining a cover identity throughout my marriage to protect the integrity of my cases and the safety of people connected to them." Serena absorbed this without visible surprise. She nodded slowly, the way a person nods when something that didn't quite add up for years suddenly resolves into focus. "The Cayman Islands," she said. "You already know." "We know money is moving. We can see the structure. We can't confirm the ownership connection without a physical anchor. The safe. Yes." She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup and looked at the table for a moment. When she looked back up, her voice had dropped to a register that was both quieter and considerably more serious. "I want to be honest with you about why I'm here, Eleanor, because I don't think this works unless we're straight with each other." "I prefer that," I said. "Richard has been stealing from me." She said it flatly, the way you say a fact you've had time to sit with. "Not petty stuff. He's been draining my personal investment account, the one I built before we were married, in increments small enough that they don't trigger automatic alerts. About $9,000 a month for the last 14 months. I kept my expression still. My internal calculator was already running. 14 months at $9,000. Over $120,000. 3 weeks ago," Serena continued, "I found paperwork on his laptop. He's working with a notary. Someone Ashley connected him with, I'm fairly sure, to forge my signature on a home equity loan against my property. The house my father left me. Paid off. Worth about $2.1 million. "How much is the loan for?" "The full appraised value. He needs the cash to cover what he skimmed from Garrett's operation. Apparently," she said with a tightly controlled bitterness that told me she'd had exactly one too many Sunday dinners pretending not to notice things, "Richard helped himself to a fairly significant amount that wasn't his to take, and now Garrett wants it back with interest." "When does the loan fund?" "The application was submitted last Thursday. They fast-tracked it through a predatory lending firm, the kind that doesn't ask too many questions if the paperwork looks right. I have maybe 48 hours before the funds disperse." I reached into the inner pocket of my coat and placed a document on the table between us. Serena looked at it without touching it. "That's a federal freeze application," I said. "Once I file it, no funds can leave any account connected to that property. The loan dispersal gets blocked at the institutional level before a single dollar moves. Richard will have no way to cover his debt to Garrett, no way to access your asset, and no way to run, because I'll simultaneously flag the forgery to the Cook County DA's office." Serena stared at the document. "You can do that. I can do that before I leave this coffee shop," I said. "One call to Derek, 10 minutes of paperwork, done." She was quiet for a long moment. Outside, a December wind pushed a scatter of dry leaves against the window. "What do you need from me?" "2 things," I said. "The code to the manual override on Garrett's safe and Dorothy's schedule for Thursday afternoon." Serena reached into her bag. She pulled out a small piece of paper, folded twice, like she'd been carrying it for a while, and placed it on the table. 6 digits. "Dorothy has her Lake Forest Women's Philanthropy Luncheon at the Onwencia Club every 3rd Thursday. It runs noon to 4. Richard will be at the Grand Victoria Casino in Elgin. He goes every Wednesday and Thursday when he's in debt, which lately means always." She paused. "The cleaning crew arrives at 11. They work the 2nd floor first. The ground floor study is always last. You'd have a clean window from about 12:30 to 2:30. I picked up the piece of paper with the 6-digit code and slid it into my pocket. "I'll file the freeze order tonight," I said. "Your property is protected by mourning." "Hi-ya." Serena looked at me for a long moment, not with gratitude exactly, but with the particular expression of someone who has been waiting a long time for the balance of things to shift and is only now beginning to believe it actually might. "Eleanor," she said quietly, "whatever is on that hard drive, make sure it counts." "It'll count," I said. I left Briar and Bloom at 2:47 p.m., walked half a block to my car, and called Derek before I'd even started the engine. File an emergency federal freeze on all accounts and properties connected to Serena Price, née Serena Adair. Flag an incoming home equity loan application as active wire fraud, predatory lender, forged notary, likely connected to Ashley Monroe at Dalton and Crow. Lock it down tonight. Done, Derek said. And Thursday? Thursday, I said. We go get the hard drive. Thursday, December 19th, 2024. 12:34 p.m., the Whitmore Estate, Lake Forest, Illinois. There is a particular kind of silence that belongs only to large, expensive houses when the people who own them aren't there. It's not peaceful. It's performative. Like the house itself is holding its breath, waiting for someone to come back and tell it what it's worth. The Whitmore Estate in Lake Forest was 4,200 square feet of that exact silence when I walked through the side kitchen entrance at 12:34 p.m. on Thursday afternoon. The cleaning crew's van was parked at the far end of the circular driveway. Somewhere above me, third floor from the sound of it, a vacuum cleaner hummed steadily, providing the kind of consistent acoustic cover that, operationally speaking, I couldn't have arranged better if I'd tried. I moved through the kitchen without touching anything: stainless steel appliances, marble countertops, a fruit bowl with 3 untouched pears arranged by someone paid to make Dorothy's home look like a magazine spread. I passed the formal dining room, the table still set from Sunday, I noticed, because Dorothy hosted every week and the staff reset it immediately after, and turned left into the long carpeted corridor leading toward the private wing. I was wearing dark trousers, flat-soled boots, a fitted black jacket, nothing that rustled, nothing with hard edges that could catch a doorframe. I'd done entries like this before, not often, but enough to know that the difference between invisible and noticed is almost always something small and avoidable. The study door was closed but unlocked. I opened it, stepped inside, and pulled it shut behind me. The room smelled like old paper and lemon polish and the specific staleness of a space that gets cleaned but not used. 3 walls were built-in bookshelves, floor to ceiling, filled with the kind of books that are purchased by the linear foot from estate sales. Leather spines, gold lettering, absolutely never opened. A partner's desk dominated the center of the room. Dorothy's personal computer, a monitor she probably used to check email and nothing else, sat dark and dormant on one corner. I went straight to the north wall. Serena had been precise. 4th shelf from the top, 3rd section from the left, a volume titled Corporate Law, Principles and Practice, 3rd edition. Navy blue binding, slightly thicker than the books around it, positioned with about a half-inch gap behind it where a standard book would sit flush. I reached up and pulled it forward. The click was soft, almost polite. The entire 4-foot section of shelving swung outward on a concealed hinge, smooth and counterbalanced, the kind of installation that costs real money and announces the thing it's meant to hide by the sheer quality of the hiding. Behind it, bolted directly into the poured concrete of the foundation wall, was the safe. Matte black steel face, biometric scanners centered above a numeric keypad, a small sliding panel below the keypad, the manual override cover, exactly where Serena said it would be. I slid the panel open, typed in the 6 digits from the folded piece of paper in my pocket. A high tone, 1 beat, 2. The locking mechanism disengaged with a sound like a held breath being released, and the door swung open. I looked inside without reaching in yet. Left side, 3 banded stacks of hundreds, each approximately $10,000. Brick dense, rubber banded tight. Emergency reserves or transaction cash. I'd know which when we had more data. Beside the cash, 2 velvet boxes. Dorothy's overflow jewelry, the kind she didn't wear often enough to keep in the master suite but couldn't bring herself to put in a bank. I didn't touch either. Right side, a small manila envelope unsealed. I lifted the flap. Inside were 3 folded documents. Routing confirmations from the look of the formatting, though the account numbers were redacted by hand in black marker. Physical backups of wire transfers kept offline intentionally. I photographed each page with my secure phone and replaced them exactly as I'd found them. And then, at the very back of the safe, half-shadowed and sitting in a gray anti-static pouch sealed with a strip of security tape. The hard drive, approximately the size of a deck of playing cards. Matte black casing. A small white label on one face printed with a string of 12 alphanumeric characters that meant nothing to anyone who didn't know what they were looking at. I knew what I was looking at was military-grade solid-state encrypted storage. the kind of device used by intelligence contractors and organized financial operations that understand the difference between a secure system and a merely expensive one. You couldn't buy this at a Best Buy. You couldn't order it on Amazon. The supply chain for hardware like this ran through exactly the kind of intermediaries that showed up in federal indictments. Garrett had not bought this himself. Someone with specific technical knowledge had sourced it, configured it, and handed it to him, which meant the operation was more structured and more protected than we'd mapped so far. I picked it up, slid it into the reinforced interior pocket of my jacket against my ribs. I did not take the cash. I did not take the jewelry. I did not move the routing documents from their envelope or leave any indication that the manila envelope had been opened. I wanted this to look undisturbed for as long as possible. I needed them operating in confidence. Needed Garrett to keep making decisions based on the assumption that his infrastructure was intact, right up until the moment it wasn't. I closed the safe, listened for the lock to re-engage, pushed the bookshelf back into position, and pressed until the click confirmed the latch had caught. Took one full pass of the room with my eyes. Nothing out of place, nothing disturbed, no footprints on the carpet near the shelf because I'd stepped on the runner, not the pile. I walked back out through the kitchen, through the side door, and across the driveway to where I'd parked 2 blocks away on a residential street with no security cameras. The entire operation had taken 19 minutes. I sat in the driver's seat with the hard drive against my ribs and the cleaning crew's vacuum still humming faintly in the distance behind the estate's stone facade. I called Derek. I have it. A beat. How bad is it? I don't know yet, I said. But the hardware alone tells me it's worse than we thought. Get the alpha decryption team in. Full isolation protocol. I want an air gap terminal and nobody in that room who isn't cleared to level 5. How soon can you be here? I started the engine. 40 minutes. The military-grade encryption on the drive took Sterling's alpha decryption team 4 hours and 11 minutes to break. I know the exact time because I was sitting at the situation room table when the firewall collapsed, watching the progress bar on Derek's isolated terminal crawl through its final percentage points. And I had been watching it long enough that I'd stopped seeing it and started just waiting. The particular suspended animation waiting of someone who already knows the answer is going to be bad and is simply bracing for the specific shape of how bad. The screen changed, and then we all went very, very quiet. Walk me through it from the beginning, I said. All of it. And Derek stood at the display wall, which was now lit from edge to edge with the map structure of what had been living on that drive. His voice was steady. Derek had the particular professional composure of a man who had worked financial crimes long enough that almost nothing surprised him. But there was something underneath the steadiness that I recognized as controlled alarm. Okay, here's what we're looking at. He pulled up the first layer. Garrett's clients, the legitimate ones, the people who actually pay Whitmore Capital to manage their money. That's the surface. Clean, documented, nothing unusual. But running parallel to that structure for at least 4 years is a completely separate client base. These are individuals and entities with significant amounts of undocumented cash. We're talking proceeds from tax evasion, fraud, a couple of sources that overlap with known organized crime adjacent activity. They need that money cleaned. They need it to enter the legitimate financial system without a paper trail connecting it to its origin. So they hire Garrett. How does the cleaning work? I asked, though I already had the shape of it. I needed to hear him say it for the record. We were recording everything. 3 layers. Derek pulled up the second tier of the map. Layer 1. The clients give their dirty cash to a handler. That handler, in most cases, is Richard Whitmore. Richard has relationships with 3 underground gambling establishments in the Chicago metro area. Relationships he built through his own debts, ironically. He runs the physical cash through the casinos. Chips in, chips out, cash redeemed as gambling winnings. The gambling establishments take a cut. The money comes out the other side documented as legitimate casino payouts. Layer 2, I said. Layer 2 is Ashley Monroe. Derek pulled up a document tree. Hundreds of files, each one a contract. She drafts consulting agreements between the now laundered cash and a series of shell companies, Delaware incorporations, most of them a couple in Wyoming and Nevada. The contracts describe services that were never rendered, strategic advisory, market research, proprietary analysis. But because Ashley is a licensed attorney at a prestigious firm, All communication related to these contracts is protected under attorney-client privilege. Standard auditors can't touch it. The IRS can't subpoena it without clearing a wall of litigation that would take years. She thought the privilege was a permanent shield, I said. She thought wrong, Derek replied, because privilege evaporates the second you use it to commit the crime rather than advise on it. Crime fraud exception. Every contract she drafted is evidence, not protected communication. Layer 3. Derek pulled up the final tier, and this was the one that landed differently. Not because it was more complex, but because of who was at the center of it. Layer 3 is Garrett himself. Once the money is parked in Ashley's shell company structures, Garrett uses his position as CEO of Whitmore Capital to authorize capital injections into legitimate hedge funds. He brings the money back into the U.S. market as foreign investment capital, clean, documented, untraceable to its origin. He and Ashley split an unreported commission on every transaction. The clients get clean money, Garrett gets a cut, Ashley gets a cut, Richard gets his gambling debts forgiven and a small handling fee. I looked at the full map on the display wall, $47 million, processed over 4 years, across 11 shell company structures, through 3 casino intermediaries, with Ashley Monroe's law license serving as the legal architecture holding the entire thing together. It was, from a purely technical standpoint, one of the more elegant layering operations I'd seen in 15 years of forensic accounting. It was also going to earn every single person involved a federal prison sentence measured in decades. Derek, I said, how many clients? He pulled up the client registry. I scanned the list. Most were names I didn't recognize. Corporate entities, offshore holding companies, individuals whose identities were obscured behind layers of nominee structures. Standard for this kind of operation. And then, near the bottom of the list, one entry that was not obscured at all. A name I recognized immediately. A name that explained, with sudden, absolute clarity, why Garrett had felt so completely untouchable for so long. Derek. Yeah. His voice told me he'd already seen it. Illinois State Senator William Hargrove. $18.3 million, Derek said quietly. He's the single largest client in the registry. Nearly 40% of the total volume runs through his accounts. The room was very still. Senator Hargrove had been in office for 11 years. He sat on the State Finance Committee. He was considered a likely gubernatorial candidate in 2026. He had shaken my hand at a legal reform dinner 2 years ago and told me Sterling Forensics was doing vital work for the integrity of the system. And he had been using Garrett Whitmore to launder $18.3 million in undocumented funds through underground casinos and Delaware shell companies and a junior attorney's law license for at least 4 years. This is why Garrett felt bulletproof, I said. Political protection at the state level, Derek confirmed. If local law enforcement ever got close, Hargrove's office could bury it, which means we cannot go through local channels, I finished. Not the CPD, not the state AG's office, nothing that touches Illinois state government. If Hargrove finds out we're building a case before we're ready to move, he has the infrastructure to make evidence disappear and the political relationships to make investigators disappear with it. So how do we move without tipping him off? I thought about it for 30 seconds. In forensic work, 30 seconds of real thinking is worth 3 hours of talking. We go directly to the federal level, I said. SEC and FBI simultaneously. Not sequentially, simultaneously, so there's no window between notifications for anyone to make a phone call. We transmit the full master file to both agencies at the same time, flagged as an active RICO investigation with political exposure at the state level. Once it's in federal hands, Hargrove's local relationships are irrelevant. And the timing? We file with the family court at 9 a.m. on January 6th. We transmit to the SEC and FBI at 8 a.m. 1 hour before. Enough time for the federal agencies to have the file confirmed and logged, not enough time for anything to be interfered with before the courtroom. I looked at the map on the wall one last time. Hargrove is a separate case. We hand him to the FBI and let them build it. He is not our job. Garrett, Ashley, and Richard are our job. Derek nodded slowly. Director? When Garrett signed that disclosure affidavit at mediation, the one swearing he had no offshore assets, he perjured himself to the federal government, I said. on a notarized document in front of a witness who is herself a co-conspirator, which means we're not just presenting evidence of financial fraud, we're presenting evidence of federal perjury committed by both the defendant and his attorney during civil proceedings. I paused. It elevates the entire case. Every charge gets heavier. Every sentence gets longer. The room was quiet for a moment, except for the low hum of the servers. Derek looked at the display wall, at the $47 million, at the 11 shell companies, at the senator's name. He really thought he was untouchable. They always do, I said. That's the thing about arrogance. It's not just a character flaw. It's a forensic vulnerability. It makes people sloppy. It makes them sign things they shouldn't sign and say things they shouldn't say and keep physical records in their mother's home office because they genuinely cannot conceive of a world in which someone is smarter than they are. I stood up, straightened my jacket, and looked at my team. We have 17 days until the hearing. Let's not waste them. Friday, December 20th, 2024, 9 a.m., Dalton and Crow, 47th floor, 10 South Dearborn Street, Chicago. There is an art to appearing defeated. It isn't about looking sad. Sadness is too readable, too sympathetic. It can actually make people uncomfortable enough to be careful around you. What you want is something more specific. The particular exhausted blankness of a person who has already accepted the outcome and is simply going through the remaining motions because nobody has told them they're allowed to stop yet. Eyes that are present but not focused. Shoulders that carry the weight of someone who stopped fighting 2 days ago. Hands that hold things loosely, like they might let go at any moment. I had been studying people under extreme pressure for 15 years. I knew exactly what broken looked like. I also knew exactly how to wear it. I dressed carefully that morning. The gray cardigan, hand-washed, dried flat, but visibly worn at the left cuff where the ribbing had started to unravel. Dark trousers that fit fine but weren't tailored. Flat shoes, slightly scuffed at the toe in a way that suggested they were the only pair. No jewelry except my mother's bracelet, which I tucked inside my sleeve before walking into the building. The canvas tote bag was the finishing touch. Off-white, the kind sold at grocery store checkouts for 99 cents, with a small coffee stain on one corner that I had not made this morning. It looked like the bag of a woman who had stopped caring about the impression she was making. It looked like surrender made textile. Inside it, beneath a folded copy of a free neighborhood newspaper and a crumpled receipt from a Walgreens, was the most consequential document in the building. The receptionist at Dalton and Crow looked at me the way people look at something that doesn't belong. Not hostile exactly, just faintly puzzled, like a piece of furniture that had been delivered to the wrong address. She confirmed my appointment for the Reed mediation without meeting my eyes and directed me to the 47th floor with the efficiency of someone who had already categorized me and moved on. The elevator was glass-walled. I watched the city drop away beneath me as I rose, and I breathed slowly and let the performance settle over me like a second skin. By the time the doors opened at 47, I was someone else entirely. The conference room was designed to win before a word was spoken. Floor-to-ceiling windows facing Lake Michigan. A mahogany table that seated 16, currently occupied by 3. Leather chairs with the kind of give that made you feel simultaneously comfortable and slightly lower than the people across from you. A deliberate ergonomic choice that I'd read about in a piece on negotiation room psychology and immediately recognized when I sat down in one. Garrett sat across from me in a charcoal suit, one ankle crossed over his knee, looking like a man who had already mentally moved on to his afternoon schedule. Ashley Monroe sat beside him with her tablet, a yellow legal pad, and the quiet, coiled energy of a woman who had been waiting for this specific moment for months. She dressed for a victory, tailored burgundy blazer, statement earrings, the kind of put together that broadcasts I win things. At the head of the table sat Oliver Davenport, 52 years old, silver-haired, the senior partner at Dalton and Crow who handled high-asset divorce litigation for clients who paid enough to ensure the outcome was never genuinely in doubt. He had the calm, mildly impatient manner of a man who had done this so many times that the human element had long since ceased to register. He looked at me, at my cardigan, my tote bag, my absent legal counsel, and something in his posture shifted fractionally. The way a chess player shifts when they realize their opponent has already forfeited 2 pieces before the game has started. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said, "you've chosen to appear without representation today." "I can't really afford... after the accounts were frozen." I let the sentence trail off and looked at the table. Garrett didn't quite smile, but the set of his shoulders loosened visibly, the particular relaxation of a man confirming what he already knew. Davenport placed a single document in front of me. Clean white paper, crisp edges, the Dalton and Crow letterhead embossed at the top with a restraint that somehow made it look more expensive than if they'd printed it in gold. My client has authorized a one-time settlement of $15,000, he said, in the tone of a man announcing a charitable donation. This covers any and all marital claims, waives spousal support, and releases both parties from further financial obligation. Given your current employment situation, a brief, calibrated pause. I'd encourage you to consider this offer carefully before... What about the penthouse? I asked. My voice came out small and slightly unsteady, exactly as intended. I put $85,000 into the down payment. That was my savings. I need to understand where that went. Ashley leaned forward with the enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting for exactly this opening. That contribution was categorized as a gift under the secondary addendum you signed at closing, Ellie. It's not recoverable. And honestly, she tilted her head with a sympathy so synthetic it had a slight chemical smell. Even if you wanted to challenge it, the retainer alone to open a contested asset claim would wipe out your entire settlement offer before your attorney filed the first motion. You'd be starting in the hole. You'd essentially be paying us to fight you, Garrett added helpfully. I stared at the document, let my lower lip do just slightly more than was natural. Let the silence run about 4 seconds longer than comfortable. I know I can't win, I said finally, my voice dropping to just above a murmur. I know you have all the lawyers and I know what I have. I looked up at Garrett and I let my eyes do the work of a woman who is about to ask for something humiliating. I just need one thing. Not money, I'm not trying to get anything extra. I just need something for myself, for my own peace of mind so I can actually move on. Davenport's eyes narrowed slightly, the professional instinct. We're not in a position to negotiate additional... It's not a negotiation, I said quickly, shaking my head. It's just... I need to know the truth about one thing. That's all. I reached into the canvas tote bag. My hands moved with a slight controlled tremor, visible but not theatrical. I withdrew the document I'd printed that morning and set it on the table, smoothing it flat with my palms. It looked exactly like what I needed it to look like. A standard form printed on regular copy paper, slightly off-center on the page. The kind of thing you'd find on the third page of a Google search result. The header read, Affidavit of Financial Disclosure, State of Illinois, under penalty of perjury. I just need you to sign this, I said to Garrett, my voice cracking precisely where I intended it to crack. It just says you don't have any other accounts. No hidden money, no secret investments, nothing I don't know about. I'm not trying to catch you doing anything. I just need to hear you say it's real, that our life was real, that you weren't lying to me about everything. The table was quiet. Oliver Davenport reached across the table and picked up the document before Garrett could touch it. His eyes moved across the page with the speed of a man who had read thousands of legal documents and could extract the operative language in under 10 seconds. I watched his jaw tighten, not dramatically, just a single small contraction of the masseter muscle, the involuntary physical tell of a lawyer who has just understood something his client hasn't. Garrett. His voice had changed register, quieter, with an edge of seriousness that hadn't been there 30 seconds ago. I need to advise you strongly against signing any document provided by opposing party during active settlement proceedings. This is a sworn financial disclosure under federal perjury statute. Oliver. Garrett said his attorney's name with the particular boredom of a man who pays someone a great deal of money and therefore believes their expertise is optional. Look at her. He gestured at me. At the cardigan, the tote bag, the performance, with a brief dismissive motion. She printed this off the internet. She wants something to cry over on her own time. Some piece of paper she can tell herself meant something. I sign it. She feels like she got closure. She signs ours, and we're all home by noon. He picked up the gold pen from the leather portfolio in front of him. It's not a legal document. It's an emotional security blanket. Garrett, the perjury exposure alone is non-existent, Garrett said flatly, because I have nothing to hide. Ashley, who had been studying the document over Davenport's shoulder with the focused attention of someone trying to prove their worth to the room, looked up. The language is completely standard, she said, with the crisp certainty of a woman who had graduated top of her class and had never once considered that certainty might be a liability. Domestic accounts, retirement assets, real property. He's already disclosed all of that in the formal filing. This is literally redundant. It's a copy of what we've already submitted. And she looked at Davenport with the particular expression of a junior associate telling a senior partner they're being overly cautious. Sign it. Get her out of here. Davenport set the document down. He unfolded his arms and placed both palms flat on the table and looked at Garrett with the expression of a man who has given his professional advice, watched it be ignored, and is now formally documenting the moment for his own protection. For the record, I am explicitly advising against this. If you proceed, you do so against counsel. Noted and overruled, Garrett said cheerfully. He pulled the document across the table, flattened it with one hand, and looked at me with the expression of a man doing something slightly beneath him for the sake of expediency. You want me to swear I'm not hiding a secret fortune somewhere? He said. Fine, I swear. I have my salary, my equity stake in the fund, the penthouse, 2 cars, and a retirement account. That's it. No treasure chest, no offshore accounts, no secret millions. He laughed. Short, sharp, the laugh of a man who finds his own joke funny. You really watch too many movies, Al. He signed his name. Bold, fast, the signature of a man who signs things constantly and never thinks twice about what he's signing. He pushed the document toward Ashley. She pulled her notary stamp from her briefcase, the heavy brass instrument of her professional authority, the thing that transformed a piece of paper into a legally sworn declaration, and pressed it down next to Garrett's signature with the efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times. The sound of the stamp hitting the table was clean and final and resonant in a way that had nothing to do with its physical weight. I looked at the document, at Garrett's signature, at Ashley's notary seal, her name, her commission number, her professional identity permanently attached to a sworn federal financial disclosure in which Garrett Whitmore declared, under penalty of perjury, that he possessed no offshore assets, the $47 million in Cayman Islands accounts, the 11 shell companies, the senator's name in the client registry, the 4 years of wire transfers that Derek's team had mapped to the last decimal point, all of it rendered into a federal crime by the 30 seconds it had taken Garrett to pick up a pen and sign something he thought was nothing. I reached across the table and picked up the document, folded it once, twice, placed it in the inner pocket of my cardigan against my chest. Then I picked up the settlement offer, their document, the one they'd spent weeks preparing, and signed it with the ballpoint pen from the bottom of my tote bag. Slid it back across the table. I stood up. Thank you for your time, I said. My voice was different now, not dramatically, not a movie transformation with swelling music, just the ordinary, unremarkable shift of a person who has stopped performing and started simply being. Garrett frowned slightly. A small confusion, the kind you get when something you expected to feel a certain way doesn't. That's it, he said. You're done? I got what I came for, I said. I picked up my canvas tote bag, looped it over my shoulder, and walked to the conference room door. I paused with my hand on the handle and turned back, not dramatically, just enough to be heard clearly. Garrett, the next time someone asks you to swear under oath that you're not hiding anything, I looked at him with an expression that was entirely calm and entirely honest. Maybe listen to your lawyer. I walked out. Behind me, I heard Davenport say something low and urgent to Garrett, and I heard Garrett's response. Dismissive, still confident, still the man who had just won a meeting. He had no idea that the meeting he thought he'd won had ended approximately 45 seconds after it began, when he picked up that gold pen. I stepped into the elevator, watched the doors close, reached into my cardigan and felt the folded document against my fingertips. Garrett Whitmore had just handed me a notarized federal perjury confession. And he'd done it while laughing at me. Friday, December 20th, 2024, 4 p.m. to Sunday, January 5th, 2025. Sterling Forensics Group, 41st floor. There's a specific rhythm to building a federal case. It isn't dramatic. There are no sudden breakthroughs scored with cinematic music, no single moment where everything snaps into perfect focus and the path forward becomes obvious. What there is instead is a sustained and methodical accumulation. Document by document, transaction by transaction, digital signature cross-referenced against wire transfer timestamp cross-referenced against physical evidence cross-referenced against sworn testimony. until the structure you're building is so dense and so interlocked that no single piece can be challenged without the entire architecture holding it in place. It's the most unglamorous kind of power there is. It's also the most permanent. We worked through Christmas. I want to be honest about that because I think it matters. Not as martyrdom, but as context. December 25th came and went on the 41st floor of 155 North Wacker Drive with the same low server hum and the same blue-white glow of analytical displays that every other day had. Derek brought in coffee and a box of Garrett popcorn from the lobby kiosk because it was the only thing open, and we ate it standing at the Situation Room table while Patricia walked us through the latest cross-reference results, and nobody mentioned that it was Christmas because the work was more important than the occasion, and everyone in that room understood that without needing to say it. That's the team I built. That's who they are. The construction of Report 517 proceeded in 4 simultaneous work streams. Derek's team completed the full mapping of Garrett's Cayman Islands operation by December 23rd. 11 shell companies incorporated across 3 jurisdictions, the Cayman Islands, Delaware, and the British Virgin Islands. Each entity had a clean corporate registration, a nominee director with no operational role, and a bank account fed by Ashley Monroe's fraudulent consulting contracts on one end and drained by Whitmore Capital's foreign investment authorizations on the other. The money moved in a consistent pattern. Dirty cash from clients entered through Richard's casino intermediaries got documented as consulting income via Ashley's contracts, parked offshore, then returned to the U.S. market as legitimate foreign capital authorized personally by Garrett. The round-trip cycle averaged 11 weeks. The commission Garrett and Ashley split on each transaction averaged 8.3% of the total volume. On $47 million processed over 4 years, that was approximately $3.9 million in unreported personal income between them. We documented every transaction, every wire transfer, every consulting contract with Ashley's digital signature, every authorization memo with Garrett's executive sign-off, each one time-stamped, cross-referenced, and indexed to the corresponding entry in the hard drive ledgers. Patricia spent 4 days constructing what she called the lie sandwich, a side-by-side comparison of the formal financial disclosures Garrett had submitted in the divorce proceedings against the actual asset picture revealed by the drive data. Every domestic account he'd declared, every asset he'd listed, every line of the standard disclosure that had been accurately completed, and then, column by column, the parallel reality, the offshore accounts that weren't listed, the shell company equity that wasn't disclosed, the unreported commission income that didn't appear anywhere in his tax filings for the past 4 years, the affidavit he'd signed at Dalton & Crowe on December 20th, notarized by Ashley, sworn under federal perjury statute, sat at the top of Patricia's document as the capstone. The sworn declaration that none of this existed, signed 11 days after our team had finished mapping all of it. It's almost elegant, Patricia said, looking at the finished comparison chart, in a catastrophically self-destructive kind of way. This one required the most careful legal construction because Ashley had spent 4 years believing, correctly under normal circumstances, that attorney-client privilege made her untouchable. The crime-fraud exception to attorney-client privilege is not a complicated legal concept, but it requires precise documentation to invoke successfully. The privilege protects communications between an attorney and client made for the purpose of obtaining legal advice. It does not protect communications made for the purpose of committing or planning a crime. The moment Ashley Monroe stopped advising Garrett on legal matters and started drafting fraudulent contracts as an active participant in the laundering scheme, her privilege evaporated. The challenge is proving the transition, demonstrating with evidence the exact point at which the attorney became the architect. We found it in the drive data. Among Ashley's files was a series of internal communications, emails between her personal encrypted account and Garrett's, dated from early 2021, approximately 6 months before the first fraudulent consulting contract appeared in the system. The emails discussed in specific operational detail the mechanics of the layering structure, which shell company jurisdictions offered the best regulatory opacity, how to structure the consulting contracts to survive a standard IRS audit, which casino intermediaries Richard had relationships with that could be trusted for volume transactions. This was not legal advice. This was co-conspiracy planning. Ashley Monroe had documented her own transition from counsel to criminal with the thoroughness of someone who had been too confident to imagine anyone would ever read it. Senator William Hargrove presented the most operationally sensitive challenge of the entire case, and I want to be precise about how he handled it because the decisions made in those 17 days had consequences that extended well beyond the divorce proceedings. Hargrove's $18.3 million represented 38.9% of the total volume processed through Garrett's operation. He was not a peripheral figure. He was the anchor client, the relationship that had given Garrett the political protection to operate openly for 4 years, secure in the knowledge that if state-level investigators ever got close, a phone call from the right office could redirect their attention. We confirmed the political protection mechanism on December 27th, when Derek cross-referenced the timing of 2 separate IRS criminal investigation inquiries into Whitmore Capital, both initiated in 2022, both quietly closed within 60 days, against Hargrove's committee calendar. On both occasions, Hargrove's office had contacted the State Revenue Department within 72 hours of the inquiry opening. The inquiries were redirected to lower priority status on both occasions. It wasn't proof of direct interference, but it was a pattern that a federal prosecutor would find extremely interesting. The decision about how to handle Hargrove required careful thought. My jurisdiction as Sterling Forensics court-appointed special master was financial fraud and RICO. I had full authority to investigate and report on the money laundering operation, but Hargrove's potential criminal exposure for political interference in state investigations was outside my direct mandate. More practically, moving against a sitting state senator required a level of operational security that the Garrett prosecution alone didn't. One wrong contact with a state agency, one email to the wrong person, and we'd have tipped our hand with enough lead time for Hargrove to arrange countermeasures. We treat him as a separate case, I told the team on December 28th. We include his identity in the master file we transmit to the FBI. They have the jurisdiction and the mandate to build the political interference case independently. But we do not reference him in the family court filing. We do not give anyone at the state level any indication that his name is in our documentation until the federal agencies have had the file for at least 72 hours and he's no longer in a position to make phone calls that matter. And if the FBI sits on it? Derek asked. They won't, I said. An active state senator with $18 million in documented money laundering exposure and a pattern of IRS interference isn't the kind of file that sits. That's a career case for whoever builds it. It was December 29th before we slept more than 4 consecutive hours. By January 3rd, the physical compilation was complete. Report 517 ran to 419 pages. It contained 2,847 individual transaction records. It referenced 138 separate fraudulent consulting contracts, each with Ashley Monroe's digital signature and timestamp. It included the full offshore shell company registry, the casino layering documentation, the perjury comparison chart, and a 17-page expert analysis of the crime fraud exception application to Ashley's privilege claims. Written by me in my capacity as both the directing forensic accountant and a licensed attorney. It was, without question, the most comprehensive single case document Sterling Forensics had ever produced, and at its core, holding the entire structure together like a keystone, was one piece of paper, a standard affidavit printed on regular copy paper signed by Garrett Whitmore with a gold pen while he was laughing at his wife. Sunday, January 5th, 2025, 11:30 p.m. Eleanor's private office, Sterling Forensics Group. The floor was quiet. Derek had sent the team home at 9. Patricia had left at 10 after placing the final bound copy of Report 517 on the center of my desk with the careful deliberateness of someone setting down something they understood the weight of. The servers hummed. The city glittered 41 floors below. I sat alone at my desk with the report in front of me and a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. I am not, by nature, a person who lingers in moments. The work has always moved faster than the reflection, and I've generally preferred it that way. There is a kind of safety in motion. In the next task, in the forward trajectory that doesn't leave much room for the accumulated cost of things to catch up with you. But it was late, and the building was empty, and I let myself sit with it for a while. 5 years. 5 years of breakfast across from a man who looked at me and saw exactly what I needed him to see. Nothing remarkable, nothing threatening, nothing worth paying close attention to. 5 years of Silicon Valley conferences I attended as Garrett's wife, while my actual work was being cited in federal court filings. 5 years of Sunday dinners at Dorothy's table, eating lamb and absorbing condescension, and watching Richard's phone vibrate with calls from bookies while I mentally filed away every behavioral data point for the day I might need it. I had built the cover to protect my cases. That part was true. The cases I worked involved people who had demonstrated willingness to harm investigators and their families, and operational security wasn't paranoia. It was professional responsibility. But if I was honest with myself in the way that only 11:30 p.m. in an empty office allows, there was another layer to it. I had also built the cover because some part of me had hoped that the ordinary life, the sensible shoes, the remote work, the Thai food on Friday nights, was real enough to hold. That I could be Eleanor Hartwell, forensic director, and Ellie Reed, someone's wife, and that those two lives wouldn't eventually demand I choose between them. Garrett had made the choice for me. I picked up my fountain pen. The good one. The one I'd bought myself when Sterling received its first federal appointment. The one I used when signing documents that mattered. I turned to the final page of Report 517. The signature line read, Eleanor Hartwell, J.D., Chief Director, Sterling Forensics Group, Court-Appointed Special Master, U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. I signed my name, not quickly, deliberately, with the full weight of what it represented. Every case I'd built, every fraudster I'd tracked, every hour of every investigation that had led through a path I couldn't have predicted to this exact document on this exact desk on this exact night. Then I reached into the locked lower drawer and retrieved the federal stamp. It was heavier than it looked. Solid brass, engraved, the kind of instrument that is manufactured to last because the authority it represents is meant to be permanent. I pressed it into the scarlet ink pad, aligned it precisely with the lower right corner of the signature page, and pressed down with both hands. The stamp hit the paper with a sound that was quiet and final and absolutely certain. The red seal bloomed on the white page. I looked at it for a moment. Then I closed the report, slid it into the leather briefcase that was already packed for the morning, and picked up my phone. Derek, we're ready. Transmit the master file to the SEC and FBI at 8 a.m. sharp, both simultaneously. Family court filing at 9. Hearing at 10. Copy that. A pause. You good, Director? I looked out the window at Chicago 41 floors below. The lake invisible in the darkness, the financial district lit up in the cold January night. The building where Garrett was sleeping under the assumption that tomorrow was just another day in a series of days that had been going his way. Yeah, I said. I'm good. I turned off my desk lamp, picked up my briefcase, and walked out into the hallway toward the elevator, toward tomorrow, toward the moment I had spent 17 days, and, in some ways, 5 years, building toward. The doors closed behind me. Monday, January 6, 2025, 9:47 a.m., Dirksen Federal Building, 219 South Dearborn Street, Chicago. I arrived at the Dirksen Federal Building at 9:31 a.m., not because I needed the extra time to prepare. I was prepared. I had been prepared since approximately 2 a.m. on December 20th, when the decryption team cracked the hard drive and the full shape of what we were dealing with had resolved itself on the Situation Room wall with the cold, complete clarity of something that had always been true and was only now visible. I arrived early because I wanted to see them first. The 21st floor corridor outside courtroom 4A had the particular institutional stillness of federal buildings on winter mornings. Gray light through narrow windows, the smell of floor polish and recycled air, the distant sound of a security scanner at the building entrance 4 floors below. I stepped out of the elevator and saw them immediately, clustered near the courtroom doors in the unconscious formation of people who believe they own whatever room they're about to enter. Garrett stood with one hand in his trouser pocket, the other holding his phone, reading something with the half attention of a man who considers the outcome of the next 2 hours a formality. He wore his charcoal briony, the closing suit, the acquisition suit, the suit he wore when he was certain. And his hair was combed with the precision that required a mirror and effort and the fundamental belief that appearances were a form of power. Beside him, Ashley Monroe in a structured cream blazer, tablet in hand, conferring in low tones with Oliver Davenport, who stood to her left with the contained energy of a man who had reviewed his strategy 3 times before breakfast and found it satisfactory each time. Dorothy and Richard occupied the wooden bench against the corridor wall. Dorothy sat with her handbag centered perfectly in her lap and her posture so upright it looked architectural. Richard sat beside her with his elbows on his knees, staring at the floor with the expression of a man whose phone had not stopped vibrating since Thursday and who had not slept well in several days as a result. None of them saw me immediately. I used the 12 seconds before they did to observe what I needed to observe. Garrett's body language, loose, confident, no visible anxiety. Ashley's, focused, competitive, running on the particular adrenaline of someone who thinks they're about to win something significant. Davenport's, professional, composed, not entirely comfortable in a way he was working to conceal. And Richard, who looked, beneath the expensive jacket and the practiced slouch, like a man standing at the edge of something he could feel but not yet see. Then Garrett looked up. The casual confidence on his face went through a rapid and involuntary series of adjustments. First, the slight confusion of a man whose expectations have been disrupted by something he can't immediately categorize. Then, a more specific confusion, the kind that comes from looking at someone you thought you knew and finding a different person in their place. I was not wearing a gray cardigan. The suit was charcoal, slim cut, the kind of tailoring that announces professional authority without requiring volume to do it. A single silver pin at the lapel, a small balance scale, the one I wore in federal buildings, the one my first mentor had given me when I passed the bar 17 years ago. My hair pulled back clean and severe. The leather briefcase that had been in my office for 6 years, its surface the particular deep brown of something that has been used seriously for a long time. I walked toward the courtroom doors without altering my pace or my direction, and I felt, rather than saw, the recalibration happening in real time as I passed them. Garrett started. Garrett, I pushed through the courtroom doors. Courtroom 4A was a high-ceilinged, wood-paneled room that managed to be both austere and imposing, the architecture of a space that takes itself seriously and expects everyone inside it to do the same. 2 rows of gallery benches, a raised judicial bench in dark mahogany, the seal of the United States District Court for the Northern District of Illinois centered on the wall behind it. I walked through the low wooden gate separating the gallery from the counsel tables without pausing, set my briefcase down at the respondent's table with a solid, deliberate thud, opened it, removed report 517, bound in dark blue, the federal seal embossed on the cover, 419 pages of the most comprehensive financial fraud documentation I had ever produced, and placed it flat on the table in front of me. Then I sat down and waited. They filed in behind me. I heard rather than saw the moment Garrett and Ashley registered that I was sitting at the counsel table rather than in the gallery, a brief disruption in the rhythm of footsteps, a murmured exchange between Davenport and Ashley that stopped just short of being audible. Davenport settled at the petitioner's table. Garrett and Ashley took their seats in the front gallery row. Dorothy arranged herself 2 seats in. Richard sat at the end nearest the aisle. The bailiff called the room to order. Judge Howard Brennan entered from his chambers at 10:02 a.m. He was 67 years old, silver-haired, with the particular physical economy of a man who had spent decades in rooms where everything unnecessary had been stripped away. He moved to his chair, adjusted his robe, and opened the case file on his desk. He read for approximately 45 seconds. Longer than the procedural situation required, in a way that people who pay attention to courtrooms would have noticed. Then he looked up. "We're here for the asset division and settlement hearing in the matter of Hartwell versus Whitmore," he said. His voice had the deep, unhurried authority of someone who has never once needed to raise it to be heard. He looked toward my table. "Mrs. Hartwell, the court notes you have not filed a notice of representation. You're appearing pro se today?" I stood. "Yes, Your Honor. I'll be representing myself in all matters related to this proceeding. Monday, January 6, 2025. 10:05 a.m., courtroom 4. A. Oliver Davenport was on his feet before I had fully sat back down. He was good at this. I'll give him that. He had the particular courtroom fluency of a litigator who had spent 30 years in rooms exactly like this one, and he moved into his argument with the smooth, practiced momentum of someone deploying a strategy he'd used successfully enough times that it had become muscle memory. The goal was simple: discredit me before I could speak, establish the procedural absurdity of my presence, and get the judge to end the hearing before Report 517 entered the record. Your Honor, with respect to the court's time, the respondent has chosen to appear without legal representation in a high-asset divorce proceeding involving complex corporate financial structures. She is, by her own employment record, a remote administrative professional with no legal training and no demonstrated understanding of the asset division statutes applicable to this case. He paused, letting that land. My client has made a generous and voluntary settlement offer of $15,000, more than the respondent's contribution to the marital estate in any measurable financial sense. Her decision to appear pro se is not a legitimate exercise of her legal rights. It is a delay tactic, and I would ask the court to recognize it as such and move to immediate summary judgment in favor of my client. From the gallery behind me, I heard Dorothy make a soft sound of agreement. Garrett shifted in his seat with the relaxed patience of a man watching a foregone conclusion play out. Davenport wasn't finished. Furthermore, Your Honor, the respondent has apparently prepared some form of financial documentation that she intends to submit as a discovery exhibit. He gestured toward Report 517 on my table with a dismissiveness so practiced it was almost elegant. I would ask the court to consider the source before entertaining any such submission. We are dealing with a woman who, by her own admission, has no legal background, no forensic training, and no institutional credibility. Whatever she has assembled on her own initiative is not evidence. It is the product of a distressed and financially desperate individual attempting to manufacture leverage she does not have. He straightened his cuffs and looked at the bench with the calm certainty of a man closing a deal. This court operates on verified, institutionally credentialed financial data. My firm works exclusively with the most rigorous forensic accounting organizations in the federal system, organizations like Sterling Forensics Group, precisely because this court demands that standard. We would ask that any submission from the respondent be held to that same standard, and that anything falling short of it be excluded from the record immediately. He sat down. In the gallery, Ashley leaned slightly toward Garrett and said something just below audible. Garrett almost smiled. I had been watching Judge Brennan throughout Davenport's argument. He had not looked at Davenport once. He had been looking at my table, specifically at the bound blue document sitting in front of me, at the cover, at the federal seal, at the particular shade of red of the special master's stamp pressed into the lower right corner. He picked up the document now, without waiting for the bailiff, and opened it to the cover page. He read, "The courtroom was quiet in the way that courtrooms get quiet when the person with the most power in the room stops performing and starts processing. 20 seconds. 30. Brennan removed his reading glasses and placed them on the bench with a slow, deliberate care that was somehow louder than anything Davenport had said in the last 5 minutes. He looked at Davenport. "Counselor," he said, "you just spent a considerable amount of time explaining to this court that it should only trust financial documentation from organizations of the highest federal credibility. You specifically named Sterling Forensics Group as an example of the standard this court should demand." Davenport nodded, confident. "That's correct, Your Honor. My firm has worked with Sterling on multiple occasions. Their methodology is—" "Then I find myself genuinely puzzled," Brennan said, and something in the way he said it, the specific, quiet, almost sorrowful register of the words, caused a silence to fall over the room that was different in quality from what had preceded it. "If your firm is as familiar with Sterling Forensics as you claim, if you rely on their work, if you cite them by name as the gold standard of this court, then I have one question." He looked directly at Davenport. "Why, in the course of preparing for today's hearing, did you never once look up who runs it?" Monday, January 6, 2025, 10:19 a.m., Courtroom 4A. The silence in Courtroom 4A was total, not the polite, procedural quiet of a room waiting for the next scheduled event. The specific, pressurized silence of a room in which something has just shifted irrevocably, and every person present can feel it but cannot yet name it. Davenport's mouth opened. Nothing came out. He turned his head, slowly, with the particular reluctance of a man whose professional instincts are screaming at him to look at something he does not want to see, and looked at me across the aisle. He took in the suit, the briefcase, the federal seal on the document in front of me, the way I was sitting. Not the careful stillness of someone trying to look calm, but the actual stillness of someone who simply, I watched the information arrive in his face in layers, like a building being demolished floor by floor. Judge Brennan set down Report 517 and looked at the courtroom. "Let the record reflect," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the wood-paneled room with the particular resonance of words being spoken for history rather than conversation, "that the respondent appearing before this bench today is not a remote administrative professional. She is Eleanor Hartwell, Juris Doctor, Chief Director of Sterling Forensics Group, and currently serving in her official capacity as a court-appointed Special Master of the United States Securities and Exchange Commission." He picked up the report and held it briefly toward the room, the red seal visible, unmistakable. "The document she has submitted is Forensic Accounting Report number 517, a federally mandated audit, verified and co-signed by both the SEC Enforcement Division and the Financial Crimes Unit of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, regarding an active money laundering and racketeering conspiracy operated by the petitioner." He set the report down. "Both agencies received the master file at 8 a.m. this morning. I received my copy at 9 a.m. The FBI Enforcement Division is currently executing simultaneous asset freezes on all accounts identified in the audit." The room detonated, not with sound, with the absence of it, and then with sound rushing in to fill the vacuum. I turned slowly in my chair. Garrett Whitmore looked like a man who had just understood, in a single compressed moment, the full dimensional weight of a mistake he had been making for 5 years. The color had left his face completely. Not the gradual fade of embarrassment, but the sudden, total drain of genuine shock. The physical manifestation of a mind trying to process something it had categorically not prepared for. He was looking at me the way you look at something when you realize you have fundamentally misunderstood its nature from the beginning. Not anger, not defiance. Just the raw, exposed bewilderment of a man who had eaten breakfast across from the person now dismantling his life in a federal courtroom and had never once, in 5 years, thought to wonder what she was actually thinking. Ashley Monroe's legal pad slipped from her fingers. It hit the gallery floor with a flat crack that cut through the silence, and pages fanned out across the marble, and she didn't move to collect them. She was staring at the notary seal on the copy of the affidavit that Patricia had placed in the court file. Her stamp, her signature, her professional identity attached permanently and irrevocably to a sworn federal financial disclosure in which Garrett had perjured himself, a document she had certified with the gold stamp of her legal authority while telling him it was meaningless. She had built a 4-year career on the belief that her law license made her untouchable. She was about to learn what the crime-fraud exception felt like from the inside. I stood up. "Your Honor," I said. My voice was level and clear and carried easily in the quiet room. Section 1 of Report 517 documents that on December 20th, 2024, the petitioner signed a sworn affidavit of financial disclosure in which he explicitly declared, under federal perjury statute, that he possessed no offshore financial assets. Section 2 contains the fully decrypted ledgers from 11 Cayman Islands shell companies confirming that the petitioner currently controls $47.3 million in laundered funds, accounts he swore did not exist. I turned slightly toward Ashley. Section 3 documents 138 fraudulent consulting contracts drafted and digitally signed by Ashley Monroe, currently senior associate at Dalton & Crowe, used to create the legal architecture of the laundering operation. Her communications, recovered from the hard drive and attached as Exhibit F, establish her as an active co-conspirator rather than legal counsel, voiding her privilege claims under the crime-fraud exception to attorney-client privilege. I looked at the bench. Section 4 documents Richard Whitmore's role as the cash layering intermediary, using underground gambling establishments to process physical currency prior to offshore transfer. The forged notary documentation used to leverage his wife's property, Exhibit G, was prepared with materials traceable to the same intermediary network. Davenport was on his feet. "Your Honor, my firm had no knowledge of... I am formally withdrawing representation of the petitioner, effective immediately." "Sit down, Mr. Davenport," Brennan said, without looking at him. Davenport sat. Brennan nodded to the 2 figures who had been standing near the courtroom doors since before the hearing began. Not bailiffs, though they wore similar bearing. Federal agents positioned there since 9:55 a.m. at my request, waiting for the moment the evidence entered the official record. Take them into custody. The agents moved with the unhurried efficiency of people executing a plan that has been rehearsed. The first reached Garrett as he was still half risen from the gallery bench, one hand on the wooden railing, mouth open on a word he hadn't finished forming. The handcuffs closed with a sound that was small and metallic and absolutely final. Garrett Whitmore, you are under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, racketeering, and making false statements to a federal court. You can't. Garrett's voice came out wrong. Too high, too thin. The voice of a man whose confidence has been load-bearing for so long that its sudden removal has left him structurally unsound. She set me up. You can't. He looked at me. I looked back at him. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that too, the way I was honest about working through Christmas. What I felt was something quieter and more complete. The particular stillness of a thing being finished properly. The last line of a long equation resolving into the correct answer. The second agent moved toward Ashley, who had not stood up, who was sitting in the gallery with her hands pressed flat against her thighs, staring at the scattered pages of her legal pad on the floor with the expression of someone watching the future they had planned disappear in real time. "Please," she said as the agent reached her. Her voice was barely audible. "Please, I'm a lawyer." "Not after today," Brennan said from the bench. He was looking at her with the expression of a judge who has seen many things and is not often genuinely disgusted. "I'll be forwarding Report 517 to the Illinois Attorney Registration and Disciplinary Commission with my personal recommendation for permanent disbarment. You used your law license as a criminal instrument, Ms. Monroe. The bar takes that seriously." In the gallery, Richard Whitmore had been sitting very still since Brennan began reading from the report, the stillness of a man running calculations and not liking the results. When the agents moved toward Garrett and Ashley, something in Richard's body made a decision before his conscious mind had finished the sentence. He stood up, stepped into the aisle, moved toward the back doors with the controlled urgency of a man trying to look like he's walking rather than running. He made it 4 steps. Serena Price stood up from the second row, where she had been sitting since 9:50 a.m., in a perfectly tailored emerald suit with the quiet patience of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment, and stepped into the center of the aisle. Richard stopped. He looked at his wife, at the suit, at the posture, at the complete absence of the careful, accommodating deference he had lived beside for 6 years and mistaken for compliance. And something in his face collapsed. "Serena, don't," she said. One word, entirely without heat. She reached into her bag and produced a document, the divorce petition and federal freeze order bound together, Patricia's priority seal on the cover, and placed it against his chest. He grabbed it reflexively. "Your accounts are frozen. The home equity loan was blocked on December 19th. The forged notary documentation has been referred to the Cook County DA. She looked at him with the clear, unbothered gaze of someone who has made a decision they are completely at peace with. "You don't have money for a cab, Richard. You certainly don't have money to run." Richard looked down at the documents in his hands. Then he sat back down in the nearest seat and put his face in his hands, and a federal agent appeared at his shoulder 30 seconds later, and that was the end of that. Dorothy Whitmore had not moved through any of this. She sat at the end of the gallery bench with her handbag centered in her lap and her posture still impeccably upright, and she watched her 2 sons be taken into federal custody with the expression of a woman trying to maintain a performance that no longer has an audience. The diamonds at her throat caught the courtroom light. The cashmere wraps sat perfectly on her shoulders. And underneath all of it, visible in the slight tremor of her jaw and the white-knuckled grip on her designer bag, was the thing she had spent 63 years constructing an identity to avoid. The simple, devastating reality that the empire she had built was made of other people's suffering, and it had just been taken apart by 2 women she had dismissed as unworthy of her attention. I closed my briefcase. The metal clasp clicked shut with a clean, definitive sound. I did not look at Garrett as they walked him out. I had said everything I needed to say, and I had said it in the language that mattered. Documented, verified, sworn, sealed. And there was nothing left that required my attention in this room. I turned and walked toward the gate. Serena fell into step beside me, her heels precise and unhurried on the marble floor. We pushed through the heavy oak doors together and stepped into the corridor, leaving behind us the sounds of an empire coming apart, the procedural voices of federal agents, the administrative efficiency of an arrest being processed, and somewhere underneath it all, the particular silence of arrogance finally meeting something it couldn't talk its way past. The elevator doors opened. We stepped in. "You okay?" Serena asked as the doors closed. I thought about it for a real second. "Yeah," I said. "I really am." The elevator descended. January 2025 to November 2025. The law moves slowly until it doesn't. For the first 2 weeks after the January 6th hearing, the visible machinery of consequence was almost imperceptible from the outside. Garrett was processed, arraigned, released on a $2 million bond with his passport surrendered and his travel restricted to the Northern District of Illinois. Ashley posted bail through her parents' home equity, the irony of which was not lost on anyone at Sterling. Richard accepted a plea agreement before his attorney had finished reviewing the charging documents, which told you everything you needed to know about how confident Richard was in his own defense. The asset freezes were immediate and total. Whitmore Capital was placed under federal receivership within 72 hours of the hearing. The 11 Cayman Islands shell companies were identified to the relevant offshore regulatory authorities through the SEC's International Enforcement Cooperation Agreements, and the accounts were frozen by January 10th, $47.3 million. Every dollar of it documented, every transaction traced, every beneficiary identified, locked in place while the federal prosecution built its case. Garrett's penthouse was seized as a proceeds of crime asset on January 14th. I know because Patricia forwarded me the court filing, and I read it once, and then I closed the document and went back to the quarterly review I was in the middle of because the penthouse had stopped being mine to mourn approximately 5 minutes after I walked out of it carrying a suitcase full of encrypted hard drives, and there was nothing in that filing that required my grief.